In this video, we'll be learning how to solve multi-step equations. You'll be using the same skills that we learned in our previous video. However, these questions will take a little bit longer to solve. In our first example, we have m minus 1 equals 2m plus 5. The first thing we want to do is identify our variable. Our variable is m. However, you'll notice that there are two terms which contain m. Remember that at the end of the day, we want to isolate m, but m is located in two terms. So our strategy is to bring all the terms that contain m to one side of the equation and put everything else onto the other side of the equation. Before we start rearranging terms, don't forget that we need to keep in mind bed mass, the reverse of bed mass more specifically. So that is a strategy that we are going to use. Let's start on the left of the equal sign. We have m stuck with a negative 1. Let's get rid of this negative 1. We can get rid of it by doing the opposite operation. The opposite of negative 1 is positive 1. In other words, plus 1. We're going to go ahead and add 1 to both sides of the equation, because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. So m minus 1 plus 1 equals 2m plus 5 plus 1. Let's go ahead and simplify negative 1 plus 1. That is equal to 0. We are not going to write the 0 in. The m stays the same. Afterwards, we are going to simplify positive 5 plus 1. The 2m stays exactly the same. Positive 5 plus 1, pretty simple. That becomes positive 6. Let's reassess our situation before we proceed. On the left side, we have m all by itself. It is isolated. However, we have 2m on the right side. We want to bring this 2m over to the left side somehow. Don't forget that this is positive 2m. The opposite of positive 2m is negative 2m, or in other words, subtract 2m. We are going to subtract 2m from both sides of the equation. So I'm going to have m subtract 2m on the left side of the equation, and I'm going to have 2m subtract 2m on the right side of the equation. The plus 6 stays the same. Let's move this up so that we have a little bit more space to finish this question. We're going to simplify m subtract 2m. If you're having a little bit of difficulty simplifying this, don't forget that there is secretly a 1 in front of that variable. However, it is not written in. That might make this question a little bit easier. We're going to take a look at the coefficient of 1 and the coefficient of negative 2. 1 subtract 2 is negative 1. The m stays exactly the same. Over on the right side, 2m subtract 2m, that's just 0, which will leave us positive 6. However, we are not going to write in the positive sign because we don't need it. At this point, we're almost finished this question. However, m is still stuck with this negative 1. Remember, there is multiplication between this negative 1 and m, so the opposite of multiply by negative 1 is divide by negative 1. And let's just make a little note for ourselves on the side. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to divide both sides by negative 1. I'm going to put that over negative 1, and what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. I'm going to scroll up to make some more space for myself. Over here on the left, we have negative 1m over negative 1. Let's take a look at the numbers. 1 divided by 1 is 1. When you have a negative number divided by a negative number, that becomes positive. So we should have a coefficient of positive 1, and then m tags along. Over on the right, we have 6 divided by negative 1. let's just take a look at the number. 6 divided by 1 is 6. When you have a positive number divided by a negative number, your answer is going to be negative. Last but not least, although I did write in this one in the previous step, that was kind of redundant. But as you recall, anything multiplied by positive 1 remains exactly the same. So positive 1 times m is just m. And that negative 6 is the same. So our final answer is m equals negative 6. And let's zoom out to show you all the work that was required for this question. In our next example, we are going to solve x plus 8 equals 2 minus 2x. The first thing you want to do is identify the variable. Our variable is x. We want to isolate x. We want to solve for x. Our overall strategy will be to get all our terms which contain x on one side of the equation and everything else on the other side of the equation. If you look at the left side of the equation, you'll notice that x is stuck with this positive 8. We want to get rid of this positive 8. Positive 8 is really the same thing as plus 8, and the opposite of plus 8 is subtract 8. Therefore, we're going to subtract 8 from both sides of the equation. X plus 8 subtract 8 is equal to 2 subtract 8 subtract 2x. Let's simplify some of the terms that we have on the left side of the equation. The x is going to stay the same. So let's take a look at plus 8 subtract 8. When you do that, you're going to get 0. We're not going to write in the 0, so all we're left with is x. On the right side of the equation, we're going to simplify positive 2 subtract 8. If you don't know how to do this in your head, you can go ahead and use a number line. 2 subtract 8 is negative 6. And this negative 2x is just going to tag along because we haven't done anything to it yet. At this point, we have x on the left side of the equation and we have negative 2x on the right side of the equation. However, we want all of the x's on the same side of the equation. My strategy is to take this negative 2x and bring it over to the other side of the equation. How am I going to do that? Well, let's take a look at negative 2x. Negative 2x is really the same thing as subtract 2x. And the opposite of subtract 2x is plus 2x. So what we're going to do is we're going to add 2x to both sides of this equation. So on the left side, I have x plus 2x. This negative 6 stays the same. Negative 2x plus 2x. Let's scroll this upwards so I have a little bit more space to work with. Let's simplify the left side of the equation. So here I have x plus 2x. Again, if you remember, when you have a variable with no coefficient, the coefficient actually is 1. However, it is not written in usually. 1x plus 2x is 3x. What you should have done was just look at the coefficient. So 1 plus 2 is 3, and the x stays the same. Over on the right side of the equation, let's simplify this. Negative 2x plus 2x is 0, and we don't write in the 0. Therefore, the only thing that we have to write in is the negative 6, which we haven't touched. We're almost finished at this step. However, x is still not isolated. X is stuck with this 3. And if you recall, this is multiplication. This is actually 3 multiplied by x. So you have to ask yourself, what is the opposite of multiply by 3? The opposite of multiply by 3 is divide by 3. So we're going to divide both sides by 3. I'm going to do that with fractions. So I'm going to write 3x over 3 is equal to negative 6 over 3. Again, let's scroll up to make more space for ourselves. This should be pretty simple. 3 divided by 3 is 1. When you have a positive number divided by a positive number, the answer is positive. So the coefficient should be positive 1 2x. Over on the left side, or the right side I should say, you have negative 6 divided by 3. The first thing you want to do is look at the numbers. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and when you have a negative number divided by a positive number, your answer is going to be negative. Last but not least, whenever you multiply something by positive 1, it stays exactly the same. Therefore, instead of writing 1x, we should just write x all by itself. X is equal to negative 2. That is our final answer. Let's scroll out to show you all the work that was required for this question. I'm going to go through our last example really quickly. We have 5x plus 7 equals 2x minus 2. First thing you want to do is identify the variable. The variable we have is x. We want to isolate x. My strategy is to move all the terms which contain x to one side of the equation and all the other terms to the other side of the equation. On the left side of the equation, I have 5x stuck with this plus 7. You have to ask yourself, what is the opposite of plus 7? That is subtract 7. So we're going to subtract 7 from both sides of the equation. Let's go ahead and write that. So I have 5x plus 7 subtract 7 equals 2x subtract 2 subtract 7. Let's simplify the terms on the left side. The 5x is going to stay the same. Plus 7 subtract 7 is 0. We're not going to write the 0 in, which means that 5x is all there is on the left side of the equation. On the right side of the equation, we're going to simplify negative 2 subtract 7. This 2x stays exactly the same. Negative 2 subtract 7 is negative 9. You can go ahead and use the number line if you're unsure how to do that. If you refer back to our original strategy, we wanted to move all our terms which contain x to one side of the equation. So I'm going to try and move this positive 2x. The opposite of positive 2x is negative 2x. In other words, subtract 2x. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2x from both sides of this equation. So I have 5x subtract 2x equals 2x subtract 2x, and this negative 9 just tags along. I'm going to go ahead and move this up so I have more space to work with. Let's simplify the left side of the equation. 5x minus 2x is equal to 3x. All you needed to do there was look at the coefficients. 5 subtract 2 is 3, and the x just stays the same. Over on the right side, 2x subtract 2x is 0, and I don't want to write that 0 in. Therefore, all I'm left with on the right side is negative 9. On the left side of the equation, we have 3x. However, x is stuck with this 3. If you recall, there's a multiplication sign between the 3 and that x. Therefore, we need to figure out what is the opposite of multiply by 3. The opposite of multiply by 3 is divide by 3. So we're going to divide both sides by positive 3. We're going to use fractions to do that, so I'm going to have 3x over 3 as well as negative 9 over 3. Again, let's make some space for ourselves. This should be pretty simple. Here we have 3x over 3. I suggest you just focus on the numbers. Positive 3 divided by positive 3 is positive 1. I'm not going to write in the positive sign. I'm just going to put 1. And the x stays the same. Over on the right side, I have negative 9 over 3. In other words, negative 9 divided by 3. Let's just take a look at the numbers. Negative 9 divided by 3, pretty easy. That is 3. Now let's look at the signs. You have a negative number divided by a positive number. When that happens, your answer is going to be negative. Now before we finish, we have this positive 1 in front of our x. Again, anything multiplied by positive 1 stays the same. Therefore, you can take out that 1 and just leave it as x. So x equals negative 3. That is our final answer. And let's just scroll out to show you all the work that was required for this question.